The grand chamber of the citadel was a monument to order, a construct of polished obsidian and captured starlight suspended in the gravity-neutral heart of the galactic nexus. Its architecture was a symphony of unified purpose, designed to awe and intimidate, to remind all who entered that they stood in the presence of history, under the collective gaze of the united species of the Galactic Council. Yet on this cycle, the chamber felt less like a sanctuary of reason and more like a crucible of fear. The air, usually humming with the quiet confidence of ancient civilizations, was now thick with a static tension, a palpable dread that clung to the high, vaulted ceilings and reflected in the dark, mirror-like floor. High Arbiter Kalen of the Xylos Collective sat upon the central dais, his multi-jointed fingers resting, but not relaxed, upon the cool, responsive surface of the judgment plinth. His chitinous plates, normally a deep, calming azure, were mottled with the subtle gray of anxiety. He surveyed the assembled delegates, their forms a diverse tapestry of galactic life. The hulking, four-limbed Cathar warriors, the slender, luminous Lumina matriarchs, the crystalline Gylon merchants, and a dozen others, and saw in their varied physiognomies a single shared emotion, profound uncertainty. The silence that had followed the dispatch of the quarantine edict to the species known as humanity was now in its third standard rotation. It was a silence that had started as a satisfying punctuation to the Council's decree and had slowly, insidiously, transformed into a gaping void of unnerving possibility. The edict itself, a document of severe and absolute containment, had been championed by the Cathar Imperium. It declared the Sol system and its inhabitants a potential biocultural contagion, their rapid, chaotic expansion and even more sudden, inexplicable contraction deemed too volatile for the stable, ordered march of galactic society. They were to be confined to their star, their vessels interdicted, their communications jammed. The penalty for violation was stark and absolute, systemic sanitization. It was, Kalen knew, a threat of extinction delivered with the cold, impersonal language of bureaucracy. And Earth had not responded, not with defiance, not with pleas, not with anger, with nothing. Their silence is a confession of their weakness, boomed the voice of General Vorlag of the Cathar, his gravelly subharmonics vibrating through the chamber floor. He stood with his arms crossed over his immense, armored chest, a living mountain of martial pride. They have received our judgment and they cower in their cradle. They understand their place. The matter is concluded. We should move on to the Gylon trade disputes, a matter of actual substance. His dismissal was total, a reflection of his species' core philosophy. Power that is not projected is power that does not exist. To the Cathar, silence was the native tongue of the defeated. From across the chamber, a soft, chiming voice offered a counterpoint. Or perhaps, General, their silence is the pause before the storm, said Matron Lyra, her slender form shimmering with the gentle internal light of the Lumina. Her people were ancient, their perspective measured in geological time, and they viewed the Cathar's aggressive posturing with a weary patience. You mistake a lack of immediate emotional response for fear. It is a common error among species whose history is written in blood and conquest. Have you considered that they might be thinking, that they might be deliberating? Vorlag snorted a harsh, percussive sound. Deliberating? What is there to deliberate? Their options are obedience or annihilation, a simple binary choice. Even a primitive species should grasp the logic. Kalen felt a familiar weariness settle over him. This was the core of their schism. The Cathar saw a potential rival and moved to cage it. The Lumina saw a new, unknown form of consciousness and urged observation. His own people, the Xylos, were diplomats and administrators, forever trying to weave a stable tapestry from these disparate threads of galactic thought. He had allowed the Cathar to press the edict, swayed by their detailed reports on humanity's chaotic datasphere, a torrent of conflicting philosophies, self-destructive histories, and art of both sublime beauty and terrifying darkness. The humans were, by all accounts, a paradox. They reached for the stars while simultaneously poisoning their own world. They spoke of universal love in one breath and waged brutal, pointless wars in the next. They were a fever in the galactic bloodstream, and the Cathar had offered a cauterizing brand. But Kalen had felt a deep, abiding doubt then, and that doubt had now grown into a living thing in the vacuum of Earth's silence. The reports on their technological ascent were alarming, Kalen said, his voice a calm, modulated tone that commanded attention. He brought a holographic display to life above the plinth. It showed a timeline, a near-vertical spike representing humanity's journey from primitive chemical rockets to rudimentary faster-than-light travel in a span of time that was, by galactic standards, a mere heartbeat. Then, just as their colonies began to dot the Orion Spur, the expansion had ceased. Utterly. Their colonial outposts went quiet, not dark or destroyed, but simply silent. Their long-range communications fell away, replaced by an encrypted, localized network that the Council's best intelligence assets could not begin to decipher. It was as if a civilization had suddenly decided to turn inward, to sit in a room and close the door, leaving the rest of the galaxy to wonder what was being contemplated within. Their FTL technology was crude, Vorlag countered, gesturing dismissively at the glowing chart. Brute force reality warping. Inelegant, it tore at the fabric of spacetime, leaving chaotic energy signatures in its wake. We tracked them as one tracks a wounded beast bleeding into the snow. Their withdrawal was not a strategic decision. It was a retreat. They reached the limits of their unstable technology and pulled back before they tore a hole in their own reality. An astute observation, Matron Lyra chimed, her light pulsing softly. And yet the energy signatures from their system did not diminish. They changed. They became more coherent, more focused. The chaotic bleeding stopped, replaced by a hum of immense, controlled power that our deepest scans cannot penetrate. They did not retreat, General. They evolved. And we have no data on what they have evolved into. This was the heart of Kalen's fear. The known is manageable. The unknown is a seed from which nightmares grow. The Council had judged the humanity of a century ago, a loud, adolescent species stumbling into the cosmos. They had sent their threat to that version of humanity. But who had received it? Who or what resided in the Sol system now behind that veil of disciplined energy and unnerving silence? The Cathar assumed they had remained static, frozen in time by their own incompetence. Kalen feared they had used their century of isolation for something else entirely. He feared they had grown up. He remembered the first contact reports, the early intercepts of their public data streams from before their self-imposed isolation. It was a maddening deluge of information. There were transmissions of such profound mathematical and philosophical beauty that Lumina scholars had studied them for cycles. And then there were broadcasts of such primitive violence and base tribalism that they made the Cathar seem like enlightened pacifists. It was their art that was the most disturbing. Music that could evoke a sorrow so deep it felt like a memory of a loss one had not yet experienced. Visual stories of sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption that followed no logical pattern of societal advancement. They were a species that seemed to possess the full spectrum of cosmic potential, from the divine to the demonic, all at once, all in conflict with itself. How could one possibly predict the reaction of such a creature to a cage? A soft tone echoed through the grand chamber, signaling a priority alert from Citadel Command. It was a pure, clean sound that cut through the tension like a blade. Every delegate straightened. Priority alerts were rare, reserved for events of the highest galactic significance. On the main holoscreen, the calm, placid view of the Citadel's exterior, a jewel of light and metal against the nebular clouds of the galactic core, was replaced by a tactical display. A single, vector-marked object was moving toward them. "Report," Kalen commanded, his voice betraying none of his sudden, cold dread. The calm, synthesized voice of the Citadel's integrated AI filled the chamber. Unidentified object detected entering the Citadel's restricted sphere. Origin vector, Sol system. A wave of murmurs washed through the delegates. Vorlag's immense form tensed, a low growl building in his chest. "So the vermin have chosen defiance. Excellent. Our fleets are ready. We will provide them with the annihilation they have so clearly requested." "Hold, General," Kalen ordered, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. "Command AI analyze the object. Is it a weapon, a warship?" "Negative, High Arbiter," the AI replied. The delegates leaned forward. "The object's energy signature does not match any known weapons platform or military-grade vessel. Its mass is exceptionally low. It is minimal. Scans suggest a single-occupant vessel." A single ship, a scout, a messenger. Kalen's mind raced. What was its method of propulsion? How had it approached so quickly and without any prior warning? The Citadel was protected by layers of gravimetric sensors, temporal anomaly detectors, and subspace listening posts that stretched for light years in every direction. Nothing could approach without being tracked for weeks, its drive signature analyzed and cataloged long before it reached the inner system. "How did it breach the outer perimeter without detection?" Matron Lyra asked, her voice laced with an awe that bordered on fear. The AI's response was, for the first time in the Citadel's long history, tinged with what might have been considered uncertainty. The object did not approach. In one moment, the space it occupies was empty. In the next, the object was present, It did not travel through the intervening distance in any detectable way. It simply arrived, and its velocity is problematic. Kalen felt his throat constrict. Define problematic. The tactical display zoomed in. The vector arrow representing the object was terrifyingly long. Data scrolled beside it, numbers that seemed to defy the laws of physics as the Council understood them. The object is currently decelerating from a significant fraction of light speed. However, its method of deceleration is not emitting any detectable radiation or gravitational distortion. It is shedding immense kinetic energy without any observable effect on the surrounding spacetime. Its final approach vector is precise. It is targeting this chamber's diplomatic docking spire, and its atmospheric entry speed will be hypersonic. A stunned silence fell upon the grand chamber. Hypersonic, a primitive term for a primitive concept. Council vessels did not engage in such crude maneuvers. They eased through atmospheres on cushions of anti-gravity, silent and majestic. To enter an atmosphere at such velocity was an act of controlled violence, a display of technological mastery so far beyond their understanding as to be indistinguishable from magic. It was a statement. This was not a plea. This was not a declaration of war. This was a message. Vorlag's confidence finally wavered, his arrogance replaced by a stony, bewildered watchfulness. He and the entire council turned their collective attention to the main holoscreen, which now showed a live optical feed from an orbital drone. They watched the blackness of space, waiting. They were about to witness the true response from Earth, a warning delivered at impossible speed. The human vessel was a tear in the fabric of reality. It did not burn or roar or announce its presence with the brute force theatrics of Cathar warships. It was simply there, a sliver of obsidian darkness against the swirling nebular backdrop, descending through the Citadel's upper atmosphere with a silence that was more terrifying than any sonic boom. The air around its needle-thin frame did not ignite into a sheath of plasma. It seemed to part willingly, flowing around the hull in smooth, laminar lines as if the very laws of thermodynamics were being politely asked to step aside. There was no shockwave, no trail of fire, just a perfect, silent, impossible descent. It was a violation of physics executed with the grace of a ballet. Kalen watched, his three hearts beating a frantic, dissonant rhythm. This was not the technology of a primitive species. This was the work of masters. The ship, impossibly small and elegant, settled into a perfect stationary hover just meters from the diplomatic docking spire's extended airlock. It had no visible thrusters, no drive cones, no glowing energy ports. It hung in the air as if it were a fixed point in the universe, and the Citadel itself was merely a transient object moving around it. Then, with a motion so fluid it seemed organic, it aligned itself and docked with a soft, final click that echoed in the vast, silent chamber like a gavel falling on their entire civilization's understanding of the cosmos. The docking procedure was complete. The external sensors registered a perfect environmental seal. An occupant was preparing to disembark. The collective gaze of the Galactic Council was fixed on the corridor that led from that airlock, every delegate holding whatever passed for their breath. The Cathar guards in the chamber, bristling with quantum-edged polearms and shielded by personal energy fields, formed a formidable, if suddenly inadequate feeling, honor guard. The doors to the grand chamber hissed open. A single figure stood there. It was a human, a female by their best anatomical extrapolations. She was not clad in the intimidating armor of a warrior or the opulent robes of a monarch. She wore a simple dark blue uniform of a material that seemed to absorb the light, tailored with a minimalist precision. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable, her posture one of serene and absolute confidence. She was unarmed. In her left hand, she carried a small, thin slate of what looked like polished black glass. She walked forward, her footsteps making no sound on the obsidian floor, her movements economical and deliberate. The Cathar guards, bred for battle and conditioned to react to the slightest hint of aggression, did not move. They seemed frozen, not by any visible force, but by the sheer, unassailable placidity of the being walking between them. The human stopped at the base of the central dais, her eyes, a shade of deep, terrestrial brown, lifting to meet Kalen's. They held a profound stillness, an ancient calm that he had only ever seen in the oldest of the Lumina matriarchs. This was not the emissary of a young, chaotic race. This was the representative of something ancient and formidable. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova, representing the unified peoples of Earth," she said. Her voice was clear and steady, her command of the Council's complex trade tongue flawless, without accent or hesitation. It was not the synthesized, translated speech of a diplomat using a machine. It was the fluent, nuanced speech of a native speaker. I have come in response to the quarantine edict delivered to my government. The sheer audacity of it left the chamber momentarily speechless. She spoke of the edict as if it were a misdelivered parcel, not a death sentence. General Vorlag was the first to recover, his pride stung by her composure. You dare to stand before this council? Your species was judged contained. Your presence here is a violation of galactic law. Your arrival, he spat the word, unable to conceal his bewildered fury, was an act of aggression, a military demonstration. Ambassador Rostova turned her head slowly to face the Cathar general. Her expression did not change. There was no fear, no anger, not even a flicker of defiance. There was only a kind of profound, analytical calm. You misunderstand, General. Our arrival was not an act of aggression. It was an act of clarity. We needed to be certain we had your undivided attention. Judging by the silence in this chamber, we have succeeded. She paused, letting her words settle into the charged atmosphere. And it was not a military demonstration. If we had intended a military demonstration, you would not be here to witness it. The threat was so understated, so devoid of emotion, that it was 1,000 times more chilling than any of Vorlag's boisterous declarations. The general's mandibles clicked shut, and for once he seemed to have no reply. The power dynamic in the room had fundamentally shifted. The council was no longer the judging authority. They were the audience. Kalen found his own voice, forcing it to remain level. Ambassador Rostova, your people were silent for 3 rotations. We interpreted that as compliance. We were silent because your edict required careful consideration, she replied, turning her calm gaze back to him. Not because of the threat it contained. That was, if you will forgive my candor, the least interesting part of the document. We were silent because we needed to understand the reasoning behind it, the fear. We have spent much of the last century studying ourselves, High Arbiter. We have become intimately familiar with the anatomy of fear. It is a poison. It clouds judgment. It leads to miscalculations. Your edict was a profound miscalculation. Miscalculation? Vorlag finally roared, his composure shattering. We hold the combined might of 1,000 systems. Our fleets can sterilize a world from orbit in a single cycle. You are a single-system species, a footnote in the galactic registry. It is you who has miscalculated, human. Rostova's gaze remained fixed on Kalen, as if Vorlag were merely a storm raging harmlessly outside a window. We did not come here to debate military strength, General. Such comparisons are meaningless. It is like 2 children in a nursery arguing over who can build a taller tower of blocks, unaware that the nursery itself is on fire. She lifted the black slate in her hand. We received your threat. We have not come to offer one in return. We have come to deliver a warning, our warning. And it is for your benefit, not ours. This was the core of it. The moment the title of their interaction was spoken aloud. Galactic Council sent Earth a threat, so Earth sent warning delivered at hypersonic speed. It was not a warning of retribution. It was something else. Kalen gestured with a delicate, 3-fingered hand. Deliver your warning, Ambassador. Rostova inclined her head slightly. As you wish, High Arbiter. She placed the slate on a small pedestal that rose from the floor. The slate came to life, and a 3-dimensional holographic display filled the center of the chamber. It was not a star chart or a weapons schematic. It was a complex, rotating fractal of immense beauty and detail. It pulsed with a soft, white light. For the past century, she began, her voice taking on the tone of a lecturer in a silent, hallowed university, humanity has been engaged in a singular, unified project. After our initial, clumsy expansion into space, we realized our technology had outpaced our wisdom. We saw in ourselves a capacity for self-destruction that was as boundless as our ambition. So we stopped. We turned inward. We unified our people, not through conquest, but through a shared purpose. And that purpose was to listen. The fractal image shifted. It became a representation of the cosmic microwave background radiation, the faint afterglow of the universe's creation. But it was rendered with a level of detail that made the Council's own deep field maps look like crude charcoal sketches. Your science is impressive in many ways, Rostova continued, her tone neutral without condescension. You have mastered energy and matter. You build great fleets and magnificent structures like this one. You look outward, searching for signals, for life, for resources. Your senses are attuned to the noise of the cosmos, but you have not learned to listen to the silence, the patterns within the silence. The display began to change. Tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuations in the background radiation were highlighted, amplified. A pattern began to emerge, a waveform of unimaginable length and complexity, hidden beneath the quantum static of reality itself. It was a signal, but not a signal of communication. It was an echo, an artifact. "There have been others," Rostova said softly, and the weight of her words seemed to press down on the very air in the chamber. "Countless civilizations, empires that span galaxies, beings of pure energy, machine intelligences of staggering complexity. We have found their ghosts, not in ruins or artifacts. Those are too ephemeral. We found them here, in the faint, gravitational and quantum scars they left on the very structure of spacetime." The holographic display resolved into a timeline of galactic history on a scale that dwarfed anything the Council historians had ever conceived. It showed pulses of civilization rising like fireflies in the dark, flourishing for millennia, and then one by one winking out. They all vanished, every single one. There was a rhythm to it, a terrifying, predictable, cyclical rhythm. "You call it the Great Filter," Rostova stated, naming a vague, philosophical concept that some of their more esoteric thinkers had postulated. "You imagine it as a barrier to advancement that a species must overcome. You are wrong. It is not a filter. It is a harvest, a recurring, predictable event that scours this galaxy clean of all complex, energy-intensive life." A cold, absolute horror began to dawn on the faces of the delegates. Even Vorlag was silent, his massive form rigid, his eyes locked on the horrifying, cyclical extinction depicted in the hologram. "We did not go silent because we were afraid or because our technology failed," Rostova explained. "We went silent because we detected this pattern. We stopped broadcasting, stopped expanding, stopped making noise. We began to listen, to study, to prepare. We devoted the entire energy and intellect of our species to understanding this phenomenon. The very thing you judged as chaos, our conflicting philosophies, our art filled with sorrow and hope, our capacity for both creation and destruction, was our greatest strength. It allowed us to conceive of a threat that was not an enemy with a fleet, but a law of the universe. It allowed us to look at the abyss and not just see emptiness." She turned to face Vorlag directly, and for the first time her eyes held a flicker of something other than calm. It was not anger. It was a profound, almost sorrowful pity. "Your quarantine edict described us as a contagion. The irony is tragic. You have been building larger and larger bonfires, celebrating your light and your warmth, unaware that you are in a dark forest and that the light attracts a hunter that has been culling this forest for eons. Your threat was a distraction. A petty squabble over territory on a sinking ship. That is the miscalculation we spoke of." Her gaze swept across the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate, of Kalen, of Matron Lyra, whose own light was now dim and trembling. "This is our warning," Ambassador Rostova said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "The cycle is approaching its turn. The silence is coming again, and you are not ready. You have been so busy watching each other that you have failed to watch the dark. Your threat to us was based on ignorance. Our warning to you is based on a truth that will burn your galaxy to ash if you do not heed it. Now, do you still wish to discuss the terms of our quarantine?" The holographic display of cyclical extinction pulsed gently in the center of the grand chamber, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping claws. The silence that followed Ambassador Rostova's final question was a new kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of waiting, nor the silence of shock. It was the profound, heavy, absolute silence of revelation. The entire foundation of galactic society, its politics, its rivalries, its endless pursuit of power and territory, had been exposed as a child's game played in a collapsing house. Kalen looked at the faces of the other delegates. The arrogance of the Cathar, the serene wisdom of the Lumina, the pragmatic calculus of the Gylon, all had been stripped away, replaced by a raw, primal fear. The fear of a creature that has just looked up and seen the shadow of the hawk circling overhead. It was Matron Lyra who broke the stillness, her chiming voice fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. How long?" Rostova's gaze softened as she looked at the Lumina matriarch, a flicker of empathy crossing her features. "By our best models, the precursor wave will begin to manifest within 500 of your standard cycles. The event itself, the full harvest, will follow. Our estimates are precise. We have had a century to do the calculations. 500 cycles. In the lifespan of a Lumina, it was but a moment. For the galaxy, it was an execution date." General Vorlag, who had stood as a titan of defiance, seemed to shrink within his own armor. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by the bewildered horror of a soldier who discovers his lifelong war was a fiction, a drill, and the real enemy is something his weapons cannot even touch. He took a hesitant step forward, his voice a low, cracked rumble stripped of all its former bluster. "What is it? A weapon? A species? What is coming?" "We do not know its nature," Rostova answered, her honesty more chilling than any fabrication could be. "We only know its effect. It is a phenomenon that targets high-level technological signatures, complex energy grids, FTL drives, artificial intelligence networks, the very things your civilizations are built upon. It sweeps through the galaxy like a wave, and when it passes, all that is left is silence. Planets remain. The raw materials of life remain. But complex, tool-using civilizations are erased." Kalen felt a cold clarity wash over him. It explained so much. The great, empty voids in galactic history, the inexplicable disappearance of precursor races that had left behind only enigmatic, powerless megastructures. The Council had always assumed they had simply transcended or died out through war or decadence. The truth was infinitely more terrible. They had been culled. He rose slowly from his seat on the dais, the movement feeling heavy, laden with the weight of ages. He looked down at the human ambassador, no longer seeing a representative of a volatile, primitive race, but a prophet. A Cassandra who had not been cursed with disbelief, but had instead forced them to see the coming doom with their own eyes. The hubris of the Council, of his own leadership, was a physical weight in his chest. They had threatened to extinguish a candle, oblivious to the fact that it was the only light in an encroaching, absolute darkness. "Quarantine Edict of the Galactic Council is hereby and forever rescinded," Kalen announced, his voice resonating with a new, somber authority. He looked directly at Vorlag, whose gaze fell to the floor in a gesture of shame that was utterly alien to the Cathar. Then Kalen looked at Rostova. "On behalf of all member species, I offer our most profound and humble apology. Your people have suffered a great injustice at our hands, an injustice born from our ignorance, an ignorance you have now." Corrected, he bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect that sent a ripple of shock through the chamber. A High Arbiter did not bow. Rostova gave a slow, deliberate nod of acceptance. "Apology accepted, High Arbiter. There is no time for recrimination. We did not come here for vengeance. We came here because we cannot face this alone." Here was the final, stunning reveal, not of power but of vulnerability, of a desire for communion in the face of annihilation. Humanity, the species they had sought to isolate, was now offering them their only hope for survival. They had spent their century of isolation not just understanding the threat, but it was now terrifyingly and wonderfully clear, preparing to confront it. "You have a plan," Matron Lyra whispered, her light beginning to pulse with a fragile, renewed hope. "We have the beginnings of one," Rostova confirmed. "It required us to rethink everything we thought we knew about physics, about energy, about consciousness. The vessel I arrived in is a first-generation prototype. It does not use a conventional FTL drive. It does not travel through space in a way the phenomenon can detect. It is quiet. Our power sources are being redesigned to be equally quiet. We are learning to hide not behind shields, but within the fundamental noise of the universe itself. But our knowledge is incomplete. We are one species, one perspective. We need yours, the Lumina's understanding of temporal mechanics, the Cathar's mastery of materials science, the Gylon's logistical genius, the unique knowledge of every species in this chamber. United, we may have a chance to build an ark, not just for our species, but for all of us, a way to endure the coming wave." A new spirit began to kindle in the grand chamber. The old divisions, the petty rivalries, seemed to melt away in the heat of this new, terrifying purpose. Vorlag, the proud warrior, looked at Rostova with a new kind of reverence. He was a creature of war, and he had just been given the only war that had ever truly mattered, the survival of everything. "The Cathar Imperium pledges its full resources," Vorlag stated, his voice now a solid bar of iron conviction. "Our forges, our fleets, our scientists, they are yours to command." One by one, the other delegates echoed the sentiment. The Gylon offered their trade networks, the Lumina their ancient archives, and on, a chorus of unity rising to meet the existential dread. An alliance was being forged, not of convenience or conquest, but of desperation and a shared will to live. Kalen felt a sense of awe that eclipsed his fear. In a single hour, this lone human had dismantled their entire civilization, and then, with her next words, had begun to build a new one from the ruins. She had delivered a warning that was also a gift, a death sentence that was also a call to arms. "There is much to do," Rostova said, her calm demeanor finally showing a hint of the immense burden she and her people had carried for so long. "We will share all our data, our research, our technology. We must work quickly. The time for division is over." Kalen nodded, a deep sense of purpose settling into his being. The future was dark and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while it was not empty. It was filled with a singular, unifying goal. "The Galactic Council is no more," he declared, his voice ringing with historic finality. "From this day forward, we are the Galactic Alliance, and our first and only directive is survival." A murmur of assent, of grim determination, filled the chamber. It felt as if they were all breathing in unison for the first time. But as Kalen looked at Ambassador Rostova, he saw that she had one final thing to say. The holographic display in the center of the room flickered, the terrifying loop of galactic extinction fading away, replaced by something new. The ambassador's face was now etched with a gravity that seemed to dwarf everything that had come before. The professional calm was gone, replaced by a look of profound, almost religious awe. "There is one more thing," she said, her voice hushed. "A final piece of our findings. It is the reason we chose to reveal ourselves now. It is why we took the risk of coming here." The new hologram resolved. It was a star chart, but of a scale Kalen had never seen before. It did not show their galaxy. It showed a map of the local galactic cluster. The Milky Way, Andromeda, Triangulum, and dozens of smaller satellite galaxies, all hanging in an impossibly vast sea of intergalactic void. A single red line emanated from a point deep in that void, a place of utter emptiness, and pointed directly, unerringly at their own galaxy. "The harvest phenomenon, the wave, it is not a natural, random occurrence," Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper. "It is directional, it is targeted. We have traced its origin point to the absolute dark, millions of light years outside our galactic cluster." Her hand trembled slightly as she indicated the point of origin. "It is not a storm, it is a weapon, and a weapon implies a wielder." The chamber grew so cold it felt as if the star at its heart had been extinguished. The existential dread of a natural disaster was one thing. The intellectual horror of a thinking, malevolent entity was something else entirely. "But that," Rostova continued, her eyes wide with a terrifying wonder, "is not the most important discovery. We have spent our century listening to the silence. But recently, very recently, the silence was broken. We detected a new signal, not the echo of the past, but something new, something active." She manipulated her slate, and a second line appeared on the vast map. This one was blue. It originated from a different point in the intergalactic void, on the opposite side of their local cluster. It was not aimed at their galaxy. It was aimed at the origin point of the red line. "It is not a language we can understand," Rostova said, her voice filled with a mixture of terror and hope. "But its intent is clear. The signal is a challenge, a declaration of war. It seems, High Arbiter, that for eons the hunter in the dark forest has operated unopposed." She looked up at Kalen, at the assembled beings of what was once the Galactic Council, and she offered them the final, universe-altering truth that humanity had discovered in its isolation. "We are not alone in our defiance. The harvest is coming. But for the first time in cosmic history, it seems someone else is coming to meet it. Something in the great, empty dark has decided to fight back. Our struggle is not the first. We have just become the newest soldiers in a war that is older than our galaxy itself." The camera of their reality pulled back, leaving the small, stunned figures in the grand chamber staring at the map of the impossible war. They were no longer the center of the universe. They were a single battlefield in a conflict of unimaginable scale, their recently unified alliance just one more piece on a cosmic chessboard. The human had not just brought them a warning of their own death. She had brought them news of a war at the dawn of time, a war for reality itself. And the true question was no longer whether they could survive the harvest, but what their role would be in the great, silent, terrible war that raged in the darkness between the galaxies.